So I wanted to talk about two books today. They are both by Tim Tingle, um, who is a Choctaw um, Native American. And I think this is a trilogy. So the first book is this one, um, How I Became a Ghost. And then the second one is When a Ghost Talks, Listen. And I don't think the third book is out yet, but I'll check because I definitely want to read it. And so I want to start by saying, I mean, Tim Tingle is a really fantastic author. Um, but I got these books and I started it and I hesitated on the first book as I got a little bit into it because I personally have trouble reading about violence to children, especially like things like torture. I literally will get nightmares. And I would say one, he writes a very middle grade book. And so these books are about the Trail of Tears. So, I mean, I know them as Cherokee, but I think actually it's Choctaw would be the correct way to um, describe the um, Native American group that was persecuted. Um, and, and I would say like he conveys like really what is one of the most cruel episodes in American history. And he does it in a very middle grade way. And so, um, there might be hints of it that maybe I saw about possible rape, but it's not there in the book. It's maybe more my interpretation of a small incident of what is not actually in the book. But so let me just talk about the first book. So When I Became a Ghost is about Isaac and his family, and he's 11 years old, and he has like a gift of premonition, so he knows that he's going to die soon. And the book starts a little bit before the Choctaws are forced off their land. And at first they hide in the swamps where they're safe, but then once winter comes and the swamps freeze over, then it's easier for the soldiers to find them, and there's less places to hide. And that's when they sort of voluntarily go on this relocation because they really don't have any choices. And it's pretty clear in the book that the reason why this land is taken away from them is because white people want this land to grow cotton. Um, and so the soldiers who are supposed to be leading this group for their safety, or at least that's what the Choctaw people believe, of course, they have nefarious reasons. And, there's good detail about how the U.S. government, the military used, biological weapons of warfare like smallpox, deliberately spreading smallpox, and also, I mean, honestly, not giving them access to the smallpox vaccination, which existed, but was sort of a more primitive version of what we think of a vaccination now. But so what you see is you have American soldiers who have immunity to smallpox because there was a smallpox vaccination that worked, although it wasn't perfect. People did die from the vaccination, and then deliberately distributing blankets to cause the disease. And so from the very beginning of the book, they're on this trail, and you see a middle grade level of suffering of the people. I would say it's appropriate, and he definitely dials it back because I'm sure it was much worse than how he portrayed it. And then Isaac does turn into a ghost. But there's also some elements of magical realism because there are shapeshifters in this story, which I thought was a really nice touch and might be part of the culture. But I would say what I really loved about this book and why I think it's such a great book is that you really got a sense of the Choctaw, not just culture, but kind of like what they believed and what they were like and how loving the families are, and their sense of humor, their ability to look for goodness, their ability to forgive. And so it's a really powerful story, and it ends with, they're still on the trail, and they're not, so far along. But there's, an incident of a young girl who has been taken from her family and held kind of hostage by the soldiers, particularly the leader of the of the soldiers. She's cooking and cleaning, and they've made her look like a boy, but that's where I interpreted perhaps she's being raped at night. Like there's this tiny hint, but it's not really in there. And so Isaac and another boy who is able to shapeshift, their mission is to rescue her, and that's a pretty exciting story. And then he also, Tim Tingle also introduces the bone pickers, which it was new to me, and so it goes more into the Choctaw belief system of what happens after death, and what the rituals are for death, and the bodies, and so that was really I love that part of it. And so then I'll go into the next book. I know this is getting long, but so I kind of thought it would be a complete continuation, because basically the journey is not very far along, and there's still a lot of interesting characters that are, shape shifting, and still a lot of intrigue between this particular group of characters and the soldiers, the Choctaws themselves and the soldiers. But instead, the second book, which is so interesting, goes into really the history of what happened before this relocation. And it focuses around the chief. I don't know if I say it correctly. Pushpa Taha, who is I would say Tim Tingle does such a wonderful job describing him and making him come to life, and you really feel like you know him and his personality, and he just seems like a really warm and wonderful person. But so what's interesting in this book is that we're time traveling. And so not only do we have Isaac, who's a ghost, to time travel, but then some of the other characters that we met in the first book who are not ghosts are also able to time travel, back in time, and closer to the present time in the book. And we see more of history that way, because we learn more about Pushpa Taha's relationship with Andrew Jackson, who was a general at the time, but of course we know he becomes president of the United States. And we kind of know what happened to the leaders of the Choctaw Nation, and how they became more vulnerable to be forced into relocation. And so there's a lot of, betrayal, and, it's not really surprising, but it's a really riveting story. And, I highly recommend it. This is the kind of U.S. history that is erased from all of our textbooks as children, myself included, growing up, taking American history, including AP U.S. history. And, it's usually just a sentence or a paragraph reference to the Cherokee Trail of Tears. And there's no real context around, what was the greed involved, who benefited from taking over the lands, what kind of intrigue, that stuff, similar to the Japanese American relocation. A lot of that, the true story, comes out, I don't know, 50 years later or 100 years later, and never really makes the textbooks. So anyway, I highly recommend both books. I am really excited to read the third. It's definitely middle grade, ages 8 or 9 and up. It really should be a must read in a classroom. It would appeal to boys and girls. It could be part of, U.S. history. It could be a part of, just also not just mythology, but if you're teaching magical realism, adventure, action adventure. I would say fans of books like Percy Jackson would like this. And it really does give you a useful context into American history, besides being two really great books to read. So I hope you will consider reading these, and thank you so much for watching.